What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Travis. Of course, this is TWA Motorsports, and today we are going to start the process of trying to make this thing run better. The very first thing we're going to start with, and the reason I don't have the light or anything up here, is we are going to do a seafoam treatment on this thing. So normally what I do, guys, is before I change the oil on one of these, I like to run some seafoam through the crankcase. Now, you got to be careful here. You're only supposed to add 1 ounce of seafoam for every quart of oil that's in the system. So this is a 6-quart system, so I'm going to be adding 6 ounces. Now, I'm not going to get real scientific with this. This holds 16 ounces, so a little less than half of the bottle is going to go in here. Now, I'm also going to pour a whole thing of it in the gas tank, so we can maybe try to clean some stuff out that's just been in there. It's got probably 3/4 of a tank of gas. I think this will help. And then the plan is to drive it back and forth to work for a couple days. I generally like to go about 100 to 200 miles with this stuff in the crankcase, and then we're going to change the oil. But in this video, we are also going to be taking the intake off. I'm going to replace the intake gaskets, and then, as I said in the first video, if you didn't catch that, the knock sensors are bad. So we're going to replace the knock sensors and the harness, and I'll list everything I'm using in the description down below, guys. But let's get started by pouring this stuff in the oil. I guess I won't show you guys the process of unscrewing that and pouring it in the oil, but that's what I'm going to do. Like I said, then I'm going to pour the other, I've got 2 bottles of this. I'm going to pour the other bottle in the gas tank. So, and then you guys will see kind of what the oil looks like when we drain it out, because I'll show you guys. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do an oil change in this video, along with the knock sensors and the harness and the intake gaskets. So let's do that, and then we'll cut to a few days from now when we start yanking the intake off. Well, at this point, guys, here's what we got going on. Put the seafoam in. I actually pulled it in just a minute ago. I've driven it about 200 miles roughly, and pulled it in just a minute ago while it was hot and let the oil drain. So I like to do that when it's warm so we can get all that junk out of there, and I will show you guys the oil in a minute. Just need a 15 millimeter to get that oil plug out. I'll probably replace the oil plug while I'm in there, but I'll show you guys that later. But anyway, while that's all draining, and like I said, I want to get as much out as possible, I think the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the air intake off. But before I do that, I'm actually going to take the battery loose, just because I'm going to be moving some stuff around and I don't want to have any issues. So just a 8 millimeter generally. I'm just going to take the negative side loose, and you can see at some point this thing has had some sort of stereo. He did a decent job running the wire, actually. Just not really sure. It looks like they left it in, but either way, let's get this guy loose. We're going to start with the mass airflow, unplugging it. And I'm going to take the filter out too, because I want to take a look at it and see, you know, what we got going on there. Just need a flathead screwdriver for this. Same thing on the intake here. And honestly, guys, I probably should have taken the cover off first, but the only other thing is we've got a couple pieces here that need to come out. I think that's it. And I'm taking it off the mass airflow sensor. So you can see all this comes out in one piece, but we're gonna have to have access, obviously, since we're pulling the intake. We're gonna replace the intake gaskets and those knock sensors underneath. So let's get an 8 millimeter and we'll take this engine cover off. Throttle body looks somewhat clean. It's not the worst I've ever seen, but these intakes hold a ton of oil, guys. So once you pull up, you pull forward, comes out of that little holder. Got that out of the way. Now we need to take this 10 millimeter off. There's a wiring harness that runs above You can see it here, runs above the intake, and the downside is we have to kind of get that out of the way in order to get the intake out. So we'll take these 10s out, get this loose or out of the way. This really, I think, is the majority of the reason for this is holding the intake cover on that we just took off. And then once we do that, there's another 10 millimeter here that you'll have to have a deep. We need to get that loose as well because the wiring harness is actually taped to that. You can see what I'm talking about there. The other option is you could undo it here. The problem though, guys, is it is taped around the backside, so you really need to get the front off, and then we can unplug the random pieces that we have here. This evap solenoid is one of the errors I'm getting too, so I need to make sure this looks like it's fitting okay. We'll have to dig into that. I have a feeling that's our problem with that is in the back. Man, these are loose. That guy should come off. And then our knock sensor harness is actually right here. So if we pull forward, we'll unclip it. See that guy right there? And then we need to unplug it. And that actually goes under the intake. So we're gonna leave it kind of back behind. The other thing is you have your map sensor back here in the very back. We're gonna unplug it. And then we should have our wiring loose for the most part on this side. And then we'll unplug our throttle body. May have to have a screwdriver for this. Oh, I got it. And now we need to mess with the injectors. The injectors, there's a little clip on them if it's not been messed with. There's a clip that pulls up, and then once it pulls up, you pinch. I don't have it far enough up. But you pinch the little plug on the bottom, and then you should be able to pull straight up. Just like that. They've definitely been in there a while, guys. So I don't know if you guys can see this little safety clip. That pulls out of the way. And then I'm gonna go ahead and put it back in its holder. That way when we go back together, all we have to do is just snap them in. But we need to take all the injectors loose. I won't show you guys any more of that. I'll go through and knock those out real quick on both sides. So just to give myself a little additional room, I got all the, well, almost all the injectors unplugged. Guys, a lot of times if you pinch them, push them down, and then pull them up, it's way easier. But I'm gonna take the belt off. I got a 15 here on the front. And the reason I'm doing that is because I wanna take the alternator off. Just because the intake I think will be a little easier to drag out. Now you don't have to do this, but to take the alternator out, you got two 15s on the front, you have a 10 millimeter on the back where the main wire comes on, and then you have a plug. So I went ahead and unplugged it. I just gotta get the 10 off the back and the two 15s off the front. And we'll probably have to use a pry bar to kind of pry it loose, and then we'll just set it to the side. It just gives you a little more access. Like I said, you don't have to do that, but I'm going to. Well, guys, I've got it loose here, but I'm having trouble getting my hand back there to get the other side loose. So I may have to thread it out as I go. I mean, it's just gonna be a little more cumbersome because we gotta hold this up, which I may use like a zip, or not a zip tie, but like a cable holder, like somewhere up on the hood of the truck to keep this out of the way, and then maybe I can snake this out. But either way, onto the fuel line. We need to disconnect that guy, and so you need one of these little tools. Generally they come in a set like this that works on multiples. I also have a single, but generally what you do is you push it forward, push this guy in place, and then it pulls loose, and I'm gonna have to do it with 2 hands, but that's how it works. That releases the locks on the inside. You push it forward, release the locks, and then pull it back. Now that we got the fuel line unhooked, and some, you know, look, some people are gonna complain that you didn't put anything underneath that. Guys, look, that'll evaporate before you even get the intake off. So, and not to mention, when you take the intake off, all the stuff that's in the rail is gonna fall out anyway. There's just no way to keep fuel from spilling. So because I can't get back there and get this evap line off, now once the intake's out of the way, I can, but I'm gonna go ahead and take the fuel rail apart separately. So it's just 8 millimeters, there's only 4 of them. And so I'm gonna take those out, and we're gonna lift the fuel rail out of the way. It'll probably make it a little easier, honestly, pulling it out. Now, when I go back together, I'll seat that in out of the truck. That way we know that the injectors are in there. And I wanna kinda clean this thing up anyway, so I was gonna take it off once I got it out. So we'll get those loose, and then we'll yank that fuel rail out. Now that we have all 4 of those out, if we wiggle back and forth, kind of pulling up at the same time, they should start to break loose. We got one side, and the other side. And hopefully we can get this guy out of here. You can see how much easier it would be if you took it out at the same time, but I think I want to kind of clean up those injectors a little bit. They look really disgusting. That could be part of our run like crap problem. I may even get a new set of injectors, guys, if they're not too crazily priced. But we got that out of the way. Now on to the intake. These are 8 millimeter as well, but before I do that, I don't know if you guys noticed, but there's leaves and junk in there. I don't want all that to fall in the motor, so I'm gonna grab my vacuum. We're gonna vacuum both sides, kind of clean it up a little bit before we go yanking that intake out, dropping all that stuff into the top of the head. Got it all vacuumed out. What I'm gonna do, guys, is in the very back, I'm using a pretty long extension to get them loose. I can't get my impact in there. I don't have a strong enough swivel for an 8 millimeter, so I'm gonna loosen these 2 back ones by hand, and then I'll be able to put my swivel on and run them the rest of the way out. But you've got a total of 10 of these 8 millimeter bolts that hold the intake on all the way to the front and the back. So we need to loosen all of those. And sometimes they're pretty snug. From the looks of things, it looks like it has the original intake gaskets on it. I'm assuming this intake's never been off. So I think we're in for a treat as far as like how dirty it's gonna be. It's probably gonna be pretty nasty. They generally are pretty gross. And dirt and stuff sets in those channels. That's why I wanted to vacuum that out. But let's get all these bolts out, and then we'll grab something, see if we can hold this up out of the way while we try to snake this thing forward. That's another reason, like I said, guys, I took the alternator out of the way. Just makes you, it gives you a little more room to work with when pulling stuff out. Now we've got it loose, so the couple things that we need to watch for, remember we gotta take this, that's the line for the knock sensors, make sure it's not gonna get caught on anything. Like I said, we're gonna have to kind of snake around this guy, which it can move. So actually, we can just kind of tuck it over here, I think. And I've got, you can see I've got this held up to keep the wires out of the way. The only other thing, guys, I didn't talk about is there is another line on the throttle body that goes to the valve cover on the other side. And then if yours doesn't have this same brake setup, you're gonna have to unhook from the back of the intake. There will be a line that runs over to your brake booster. You'll have to unhook that guy. So it's another thing you need to watch for when you're pulling it out, if you have that. But other than that, we should be loose. Looks like a couple of them are being stubborn. Pretty common. And we need to try to feed this thing out of here. We got it. Holy cow, it's nasty. Definitely a lot of carbon buildup in there, guys. So now before I do anything else, I'm gonna grab my vacuum and we're gonna go over this again. Yeah, it looks pretty ratty. There's a lot of carbon buildup in there. Holy cow. But we're not gonna worry about that right now. We're just gonna concern ourselves with getting these knock sensors out. But before like I said, before I do that, let's grab the vacuum and kind of clean that up a little. So depending on how long these things have been in here, sometimes they can be kind of a trick to get that guy unhooked. That is not the way it's supposed to come unhooked, guys. You're supposed to be able to pull this little rubber grommet out. So look at that. The clips broke on it. Interesting. Okay, well, that is not the way it's supposed to come apart. So my guess is, holy cow, that is not it. Interesting. Okay, well, it's off there. That's not the way. Normally, guys, this pulls off. This little rubber sleeve will pull back, and then you push these together to release this clip. But either way, I believe these are 1 inch, but I will, let me go check and see, and then I'll let you know what size they are to get the actual knock sensors themselves out. Actually, maybe they're different for different years. I think 1 inch is what my Trans Am takes. This is a 22 millimeter. And that one doesn't show to be bad. It shows to be number 2, which is the back one. But replace them both. Replace them both in the harness. I'll list all this stuff, guys, in the description down below. But anytime you're replacing knock sensors, look, inevitably you'll get this all back together with new intake gaskets and whatnot, and then you'll have this other one go bad. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to replace just one. And then anytime I've ever been in here, I always replace the harness too. Just good habit. And I only use, oh, look at that. Definitely had some water on it, guys. I only use GM knock sensors, period. I don't use anything else. That one definitely looks terrible. All right, I'm gonna vacuum that out again, and then I'm gonna go ahead, probably with like a small scraper and the vacuum up here, and like scrape around on the head and stuff, and then use some brake clean and a microfiber to kind of clean the top of the heads up so we get a good mating surface when we go back together with the intake. But yeah, it's gonna be a lot of vacuum and scraping and wiping. One other thing I did before I start scraping and cleaning is I took some paper towels, some shop towels, and stacked in all the ports and in these holes here, because obviously we're gonna move dirt around and there's gonna be some that wants to go down, and we don't want that in the heads themselves. So I'm gonna try to clean this up. I won't show you guys that process, just some brake clean and a lot of elbow grease. It shouldn't take real long, to be honest with you. The vacuum, and then we should have it all cleaned up, ready to go back together. Well, you can see it looks a little better now. And guys, I probably spent, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes with just, I did use a razor blade around the ports. But we've got our new knock sensors here, and I'm gonna loosely thread them in. We'll come back and tighten them up, but make sure that they're not cross-threading, because sometimes they want to do that. And like I said, guys, you do what you want. You can get some cheap knock sensors out there, but I only use the original AC Delco. Just what it's always worked well. Never have any issues. And I've just kind of heard horror stories of other people using the cheap ones and it coming back and biting them. So thread them in by hand. Like I said, make sure they're not cross-threading or anything. And then we'll come back. Let me go grab the torque specs, because I don't remember off the top of my head what it is. And we'll get them torqued down. So these don't take much torque. 15 foot-pounds is what we're going to put them down to. I may have to go back. I'm gonna have to go back to that bigger extension, but we'll get them torqued down to 15, and then we'll grab our new harness, which is actually not here yet. It's supposed to be in the mail today. But we'll skip to that. We'll grab the harness and get it in place. Well, while we're waiting, there's a couple things I want to do. First of all, I'm going to clean this intake up quite a bit. So to get the intake gaskets off, there's a clip here. There should be a clip in the middle, and there's a clip in the back. And so our old intake gaskets are off. We're going to toss those. They look terrible. I'm going to also pull this out. It looks like it's kind of disintegrating, but I'm going to set this aside because we're going to clean this intake really well on the inside. I'm going to try to set them the way they came out. I'm making a huge mess here. But anyway, I want to get these off because we're going to put the new ones on, obviously. But I also want to check a couple other things. I'm going to take the throttle body off, and mainly because I'm going to be turning this thing upside down and cleaning it with some like brake clean. So we'll take it off. I'm going to clean it up. And then I want to look at the map sensor to make sure that we don't have any oddball issues there. I'm going to replace this gasket too, but see how carboned up that is? I'm going to clean that up really well with some brake clean. So I kind of got a bunch of parts laying around here. Let's flip this thing over and see. A couple of our, you can see our map sensor right here. I'm also going to try to take this off if I can do it without breaking it. And we'll get to that in a minute. But this guy, a lot of times these get really gummed up with carbon. So we're going to attempt to pull it out. Yeah. Oh, that's not bad at all. Yeah, we'll just wipe that down. But I want to keep it out while I'm cleaning the intake. So we'll set it over here to the side. We'll just wipe it down. It doesn't look too bad. But I got a lot of work ahead of me, guys. I'm not going to show you this part because it's really kind of a grueling, long process. But essentially what I do is I turn this thing where the throttle body is facing down. So kind of like this. And look at that nasty buildup of carbon there. So I'm just going to kind of put my headphones on and look at the oil that came out of the bottom already. That's how much oil these things hold on the inside. It's absolutely outlandish. It really needs, if I can find, I may end up putting a catch can on it to try to keep some of that oil out of there, but that's gross. That is a terrible, terrible design. But look, that's how they all are. So if you turn these things upside down, you're gonna get a big puddle like that. But let's go clean this thing up, and then we'll put some new gaskets on the throttle body and stuff, the new intake gaskets on, and get it back together. So I think at this point we've got all our parts. I've got the intake clean, which we'll take a peek at here in a minute, but I finally got this guy in. Guys, anytime you replace these knock sensors, I think it's a good idea to replace the harness. They get pinched with the intake, they cause problems. This is what I was talking about when I took the other one out. You see how this threads up on here so you can actually reach down and plug these in? That's what we want to do. And they're shaped a certain way. You can see the shorter end is going to go closer to the back. But listen for it to click. You hear it click on there? You want to kind of gently pull up on it, make sure that it's seated properly. And then we can push this down into place. And it should be a really tight seal. That's a really good seal there. Some people even go as far as to use silicone on these. But I'm not going to use any silicone. Let's get this other one here. That one's on as well. And so now we'll move on to the intake, because I did clean the injectors up a little bit, which I want to show you guys. I'm gonna have to get my stool to reach that, to push that last one. It's too much of a reach for me. So let's move over to the intake now that we've got that in place. So for the intake, guys, remember I pulled the fuel line off separate, and I pulled all the injectors out and gave them a good clean up. And we'll look at those here in just 1 second. But I think, you know, I was originally gonna put it all in as one piece, but I think what I'm gonna do, guys, is I'm actually gonna just put it all in, or put it in like I took it out. So we're gonna put these new intake gaskets on. Let me grab something to maybe wipe this down. These things, guys, they have so much oil. You guys saw that from the beginning, but they have so much oil in them, it's ridiculous. I cleaned all these off really well. Just going over them one more time. There's a little bit more oil that's leaked out of them, but used a bunch of brake or fuel injector cleaner, parts cleaner, you know what I'm talking about, like your aerosol. But we need to put these new intake gaskets on. I really think that's a lot of our issue as far as the misfire. So we're gonna put these on just like we took the old ones off. You will have a couple clips in the front, the back, like that. And I'll list these down below as well. Oh, wrong one. And once we get these on here, guys, I'm gonna go ahead, put the bolts in, and we'll see if we can just set it in place. I need to get those 2 pieces of foam that we took out here of the front. Let me go grab those. We'll push those back into place. That's a good idea to have those. Just kind of keeps extra dirt and debris and sometimes even water out of those knock sensor holes. Now you may think I'm crazy and I've done this before, but don't forget to take your paper towels out that you had in the cylinders. And as a matter of fact, I'm gonna grab my vacuum. There looks to be a little bit more dirt there. Vacuum those off as I'm pulling them out, and then we'll get this intake in place. Got all the towels out now. So let's see if we can get this thing in here. And to make sure that your harness that we put back in there in the back isn't like getting smashed anywhere. And then it's as simple, guys, as just setting it in here. You're gonna have to move it around a couple times, I'm sure, but you can kind of see where it lines up, especially without the fuel rail in place. And here's another way you can tell it doesn't want to rock. See how it's not rocking back and forth? I've got it lined up with the portholes. So what I'm gonna do is just kind of hand snug these down by just literally hand tight, guys. Nothing more than that. And then we will grab, I don't even think I'm gonna torque it down yet. I think I'm gonna go work on the injectors and we'll torque it down once I get, I mean, I guess we could torque it down. I just don't wanna drop anything in the injector holes. Like I said, normally I would take the intake off with the injectors on it, but because I couldn't reach this guy here, I didn't want to do that, which I probably could have reached back there once the intake was off and got it like I had said, but I didn't. All the holes are lining up, everything's threading in. You don't want to cross thread these, so I like to thread them in by hand so we know what we're getting. All right, let's go back over to the injectors and check out what we got over there. So for this, I did buy all new injector O-rings. Guys, I think this is a good idea anytime you're taking these apart, and it's just good measure in my opinion. But either way, we need to put these guys on here, get them in place. The blue one should go on the top, the brown one's on the bottom. And we need to make sure that these go into place on the fuel rail. Now, you have to pull a clip out in order for that to happen. The clip comes through a certain way, but in order to put these in, normally I would use some like Vaseline, petroleum jelly, but I don't have any, unfortunately. So I'm gonna just use a little bit of engine oil. I'm gonna go get some engine oil on my fingers and kind of work these into place. And then once they're in, guys, we need to make sure that we put our clip back on. Otherwise, and it actually goes on like this, otherwise, if you don't, the pressure from the fuel will actually push these guys out, and we don't want that. So let's get these all lined up and in place. I won't show you guys me working my way through all 8 of these. And then hopefully we can put a little bit of oil on the end, on the brown end there, right here, and get them slid into place on the actual intake itself. I got these in, and with the help of a little bit of motor oil, guys, they went in really well. The clips, as you can see, they face, the open end faces towards the outside, and then the center of the injector, hopefully you guys can see that, lines up with a kind of a tab in the middle here. So should look like that. Sometimes the injector clips are a little hard to get in because you actually pull the injector up a little bit and they sandwich underneath this lip right here, but around the inside of the injector. There's a smaller diameter piece right below this lip. But anyway, let's see. I'm gonna put a little bit of motor oil around these guys, and then hopefully it doesn't fight us going in. Then we'll move up there, and I've just got a little bit of motor oil. I really like to use like petroleum jelly, like Vaseline or something, when I have it here. For some reason, my wife decided to throw it away when she was cleaning out cabinets, so I thought I had it in the garage, but she was cleaning out the garage cabinets in the house, and obviously we've moved to the shop since then. But this will work. You don't want any on the end of the injector. Hopefully that's pretty obvious, guys. I mean, don't put any there. Let's move you up to the car or the truck, get this thing in. Now this does go a certain way. We need to make sure that our fuel rail, the opening, points to the back of the truck. So let's see if we can make our way around all this stuff. I didn't plug anything in on purpose, guys, because you never know what needs to move in order to get you where you need to be. I'm not trying to bang it around on anything or set the injectors anywhere where they could possibly get dirty. Just trying to get us back in place. I've got lined up. See if we can get it in place. It's definitely going in there easier than the way it came out. Oh, you know what's keeping it from happening? This evap line. Needs to come up on the inside, I think. Yep. All right, we're gonna have to pull it back out. That evap line needs to come through here like this. Now we should be good. Perfect. That's exactly how it's supposed to fit. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go grab the fuel line or the fuel rail bolts. Should be 4 of them. And we'll get them started and torqued, and then we'll worry about hooking up everything else. Now you don't have to worry about doing these in sequence, the rail bolts, the fuel rail bolts, but they go to 89 inch-pounds, not foot-pounds, inch-pounds. And so we're gonna go up here to 89 inch-pounds, snug those down. And then guys, technically, the intake bolts are supposed to go to 89 inch-pounds as well, but I generally make one pass at 44 and then a second pass at 89. And so I'm gonna do that while I'm in here as well. And I will show you guys the sequence. I'll throw a picture up here on the screen. And that is the sequence that you're supposed to do. I do 44 in that sequence, and then I follow that up with an 89 in that sequence. We got it all torqued down, guys, so now we need to go back and start plugging some stuff in. We're gonna start right here, back off the back, or the front of the intake here. It goes to the top of the valve cover. I'm gonna go to the other side and do the same thing with this guy. This came from the top of the valve cover back here in the back, and I spun it over to kind of get it out of our way. So we'll put it in place. We're going to click our fuel line on. We're going to grab our new harness that we put in. We're going to clip it. Actually, you know what? Let's just get this unhooked now. This guy clips to the intake up here. So this kind of sits in here like this. Looks like it's moved around a little bit, but anyway, our new piece that we put in should come up here and clip. May have to route it around a little bit. We want it to clip to the intake. Just like that. And we'll plug it in. Don't forget about our map sensor in the very back. And then guys, remember, if you have a truck equipped with a booster, a brake booster, you need to get that guy plugged in as well. And I don't remember, I think this went on top of that. Pretty sure it did. And then we need to make our way down, plugging in each and every one of our injectors. Remember, there's a clip in them, but if your clips got lost, guys, or you don't have them, it's not a big deal. You just want to kind of plug them in and then pull them back a little bit, trying to test them, making sure that they're in there snug. And if it's quiet enough, generally you can hear them click, but there's people driving around outside, so I'm not going to be able to hear all of it. We'll get all the injectors plugged in. This all goes to the throttle body. And once we get the injectors all plugged in, we can move on to the throttle body itself. We'll plug this guy in. We should have a plug for it. You got a plug that goes up top to it, and then we'll have the other one here goes in the alternator. We'll get to that here in a minute. But let me get the injectors the rest of the way plugged in. I did take them out of the loom on this side because it was causing me a little bit of an issue getting them out. And these clips sometimes want to be a pain as well, guys. Sometimes you got to force them back in there. A couple of mine fell out. Like I said, it's not a necessity that you have them, so if you lost one or two, don't freak out. Hear that? It's a good solid connection. It's not pulling back. So let me get the rest of those plugged in, and then onto the throttle body, I guess. And now onto the throttle body. I decided to get a new gasket because that old one looked pretty rough. It's completely oil soaked and looked like junk. So this is actually a Felpro, which I'll list down below. I generally use GM, all GM stuff, but the GM one was on back order. And I just recently used the Felpro one on the 55 with no issues. So in my opinion, it'll work. Let's grab the throttle body. And remember, we've got to hook up a couple things here. We've got a coolant line that's going to come in from the other side here. I've got kind of strung up, but then this coolant line, I'm going to attempt to push it on maybe kind of at the same time we're putting this in place. Yeah, it seemed to work. Then we have our 3 10mm. And I believe these are 89 inch-pounds as well, but I'm going to double check for you guys. We'll get them hand tight for now. I wish they were 8s since everything else was 8s, but 10 and 8s pretty much gets you through the whole truck. And for now, I'm gonna go ahead and plug this in, push our lock in place. Good there. It is indeed 89 inch-pounds. The other thing, guys, is do not forget to hook up not only these coolant lines, but make sure that if you moved your clamp, make sure you slide it back in place as well. We're gonna go ahead and tighten this down, and then we'll move on to the alternator over here. Let's get the alternator back on. You may have to kind of wiggle around, and it may not hurt to get a rubber mallet, honestly, guys, but there's only two plugs here. You've got the main plug that plugs in the back, which we can go ahead and put in, and then you have your power, which is a 10 millimeter, and guys, I just snug this down by hand. No sense in getting it crazy tight. You just want to make sure that that boot goes back over it so we don't get any sparking or grounding on anything. They make that little rubber boot. And then I think I generally tighten the alternator bolts to about 37 foot-pounds. I will double check that as well. But I think we're gonna have to use a mallet to knock it down into place so we can even get the bolt started. Here we got one. I think we went a little too far on that one. We'll get those snug down, and then I'll see if I can find a torque spec. I'm pretty sure it's 37, but I want to double check for you guys. It is 37 foot-pounds. You should always trust your gut. Guys, I need a new torque wrench. I'm sure most people don't torque this, but while we've got this 15 on though, let's go ahead and grab our belt and see if we can get it where it needs to go. Depending on your vehicle, guys, and what equipment you have, there's a routing diagram on the front, unless it's faded off. A lot of times it fades off. This is always fun to try to do one person. See if we can get it started anyway. Got it started. We just need to flip it under this idler arm or idler pulley. Make sure we get it all lined up. You don't want it flying off. I like to make sure all the grooves are lined up on all the pulleys. Generally, if you bump it though, it'll either fly off or align. So now I'm gonna go ahead and grab the 10 millimeters. We're gonna put that plate back on. We'll put this guy, this is for the intake cover. We'll take a walk around and make sure that we've got everything. Obviously, guys, we need to put the intake back in place. I don't feel like I need to probably show you that part. Just the Phillips here, Phillips over here. We'll get that in place. And then we'll walk around and take a look at it and make sure that we've got everything plugged in. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna put that plate on and then we'll walk around. I wanna show you guys, make sure a couple areas that you wanna take note of. Also, you notice that my oil cap is off because remember we drained the oil out. So always remember if you're doing that separate days, don't forget and try to start it with no oil. Let's take a walk around and make sure that we've got everything hooked up. So obviously mass airflow sensor after you get your intake track in place, guys. Double check all of your injectors, making sure they're all good. Obviously your injectors are seated properly in the intake itself. All your plugs are plugged in on this side. The only real one here is the throttle body, which you guys saw me plug in. And then to the other side, there was a 10mm nut that I forgot to tell you guys about that just keeps this in place. We did the same thing on this side with the injectors. Make sure this boot goes back over where you hook the alternator up, plug the alternator in. That's pretty much it, guys. I hooked the fuel line up, you can see, and you can test it by trying to pull back on it. But there is like kind of a safety here if you want to use that. It kind of goes here and then snaps on to kind of keep it in place. You know, I've seen them with and without it. I don't think you have to have them, but since I've got it, I'm going to go ahead and put it on. But other than that, guys, that's pretty much it. We've got everything tightened down other than the intake cover, but I wanted to show you guys making sure that you plugged everything in. That new harness that hooks on the top of the intake, the map sensor in the very back, it's kind of covered up now with this plate. And then of course your purge solenoid for your evap, make sure it's plugged in. That's pretty much it. I'm gonna slide the intake back in place. We're gonna get to the bottom of this thing and put the oil plug back in. And I won't show you guys that, but I did want to show you how nasty the oil was. Remember, we ran that sea foam through. So I'm gonna go under there, put a little bit of oil on your filter, your oil filter before you put it on. Kind of helps soften that gasket. And then other than that, guys, I try to, since this mounts upside down or the filter goes up, I try to fill the filter with a little bit of oil before I put it in place. But that's pretty much it. You know, there are torque specs on the oil, like the actual bolt itself. It's 18 foot-pounds. And I believe it's the exact same on the filter, but I just get those snug. I don't get crazy with those either. But then we'll come up, pour some oil in it, and we're gonna give it a shot and see if maybe a couple of our lights went away. Maybe it'll idle a little better. Well, we got the oil in it. Everything's buttoned up, ready to go. But I wanted to show you guys how nasty, look at this oil. Now remember, I put that sea foam in it, so that's gonna make things really nasty. I like to do that, you know, especially when I haven't owned a vehicle. I don't know what the routine maintenance has been. I like to do that probably the first 2 or 3 oil changes. So like maybe 200 miles from being ready to change, and I'll try to change it a little early, maybe just a hair before 3,000 miles, especially on these older motors. I like to put some of that seafoam in and then drive it around for another 200 miles, let's say, tops, and then drain it out and go with fresh. Now, once I get it to my routine, like I use on all my stuff, which is generally 3,000 miles, I don't generally use that. But let's give it a shot here. Guys, look, it's gonna take a little bit to crank over because we did drain all the fuel rail out and all the injectors. So don't be concerned if it takes a little bit of cranking to get going. But we're gonna give it a shot for the first time here. Oh, actually, it would help if I plug the battery in. Let me plug the battery in real quick and then we will give it a shot. Now that the battery's plugged in, we'll give it a shot. Like I said, don't be alarmed if it cranks for a little bit because it's going to take a little while. Sometimes I like to prime the pump up too. Let's turn all these things off so we can hear. I hear the pump. It doesn't hurt to turn it on and off a couple times to get the pump kind of primed. Try to get as much fuel up there as we can. Let's give it a shot. See that oil pressure low for a second? It's running. I'm gonna shut it off. I'm gonna check the oil and then we're gonna see if we can pull it out and maybe take it down the road and see if it's a lot smoother than what it was. Well, it was a little low on oil, but let's see if we can get it out of here. And I don't know, guys, it seemed awful choppy when it was idle in there, but oil pressure is good. Service engine light's back on, which we didn't mess with the purge solenoid. That could be why it's on. I don't know. have to scan it and see, but let's take it out of here. And I don't know, guys, it's still pretty choppy. I don't know if you guys can hear it. I could hear it when it was idling, but it literally could be a fuel injector bad. Now that we've driven it down the road, we still got a misfire. I've got my HP tuners hooked up. Now remember, guys, I scanned this before, and I actually just scanned it again, and we're still showing a injector, so a P0200, and then of course the P0300, which is a random misfire. You guys saw the engine light flashing. So what I did was, you can add in the scanner of HP tuners, you can go up here to the little plus that looks like a gear and the little plus icon, and you can add misfires per cylinder. So we have current, and then I have history. And the reason I chose both is current is only going to show you as it's happening, but history will stack them up. So you can kind of diagnose what cylinder your misfire's on, because you know, you could chase this all day long by swapping out injectors, trying to figure out, you know, if maybe it's a short in an injector, because a lot of times the wiring goes bad, which we'll look at. But this kind of gives us an area to start with. So if we see it on, like, you know, certain cylinder, let's say cylinder 6, then we can go look at the wiring on cylinder 6, like to the actual injector itself. Not to mention, if the wiring looks good, we can pull that injector out and replace just that injector. So it gives a really good diagnostic. So we're going to start it up. Sounds terrible, and we're going to connect to the vehicle, and then we're going to start recording, and we're going to watch for misfires. Oh my gosh, see cylinder 8, look at that, 10 of them. So it's the very back cylinder. Look, 182 of them so far. Look, 58 happening as we speak. 200, we're up to 240 on that cylinder. Now, cylinder 1 also has a misfire, but that could just be randomness. I don't really think that's our issue. It's definitely cylinder number 8. Oh, well, cylinder number 1's going crazy now. Look at that. I'm wondering if cylinder number 1's going crazy because of cylinder number 8. But it looks like 1 and 8. So as we're looking at the motor, guys, 1, your odds should be on the driver's side, and your evens on the passenger. So 1, 3, 5, and 7, and then 2, 4, 6, and 8 should be the way that they register in here. So what I'm planning on doing, we're going to pull it back in the shop, and we're going to take a look at those injectors and see if that could be our issue. So you can see that I've got the number 8 injector plug off. And guys, honestly, everything looks good with it. So I'm thinking it's probably the injector, if I had to guess. All the wiring looks good. There's no pinches or breaks. And so I'm gonna guess that it's probably the injector itself. That's my guess anyway. So here's what I'm thinking I'm gonna do. I've got some extra injectors. And so what we're gonna have to do is, obviously we're gonna take the injectors out. But I'm also gonna pull number 1 loose here, because remember, we got some misfires on number 1 as well. We're gonna take a look at it. That should be your very front one. Like I said, 1, 3, 5, and 7, and then 2, 4, 6, 8 on the other side. But let's swap these injectors out with some extras that I have laying around. It kind of sucks because you do have to go through, obviously, and unplug everything that we plug back in, but it also gives me the opportunity to, you know, trace down exactly what's going on. So I'm going to replace both injectors. Well, I say that if I see an issue with the wiring, guys, I'll cut back in, but if not, it's pretty much the same process. We're going to take the top of the intake off, take the fuel line loose, and everything else that we need to take loose, get the injectors out, swap them. I won't show you guys unless there is a wiring issue that I want to show you, like a break in the wire. Got it all back together, and one of these, I think the clip on the top was broken on, because the number 1, so remember we had a miss on number 1 and number 8. The number 1 was unplugged, and it wasn't like staying plugged in. So I went ahead and swapped it out too. So I've got 2 injectors here, extras, or bad, I'm gonna mark them with something, because like I said, I pulled them out of that 6-liter sitting over there. It's the exact same injector for each one, and that truck ran fine. So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna at least put the screw right here, but I'm not gonna worry about putting this back together because obviously we may be pulling it back apart. So just make sure all the wiring looks good and everything. So we're gonna hop back in and give it another shot. So let's give it a shot here. It's gonna be, we're gonna have some issues cranking, I'm sure, but we'll get this plug back in and see what kind of misfires we have now. Is that even the key? Yeah, that's the right key. All right, let's try it. Sure is idling smoother. Let's scan again here. Oh, it's idling way smoother, guys. Look, zeros across the board. So let's go to clear the diagnostic codes. Let's go to read. We can clear them real time. See the P0200, and I can just tell by the way it's running, guys. It's like night and day difference. Look at that, no misfires across the board. So let's look at what we've got. Been driving around for about 10 minutes now, and still don't have a service engine light, but look at the misfires on 1, 3, 5, and 7. Okay, so those are all on the same cylinder, but let me show you something else that I noticed is definitely wrong. And I said something about this earlier, but look at the long-term fuel table, or the long-term fuel reading. You see it was in the red just a minute ago. Look at the responsiveness. Look, we're back in the red. Look at the responsiveness of this O2 on that side. So that O2 is bad, and that is the reason we're getting them on that cylinder, or on those cylinders, because that is the driver's side of the car. So guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a new O2 sensor in that bank. So that's sensor 1, bank 1. And see if that smooths it out some more, because it is kind of choppy when you're not like all in it. But I think that'll fix our issue. I broke down and bought a new one because none of the old ones I had actually fit. So we're gonna get under there. It takes a 7/8 wrench, guys, and you just have to unplug and plug this new one in. They are different plugs. All the ones I have are from deleting cats over the years. They're a rear O2. The rears and the fronts have different plugs on them. Could I rewire it? Maybe, but I don't know. I don't know that I trust the ones that I have, to be honest with you. So we're gonna roll under here, put this in, see if that fixes our problem. I really think it's going to, because there was not a lot of response out of the other one. So we got it in. Let's give it another shot. Connecting to the car. We're gonna start recording before we actually start it. Now let's see what happens. Remember, this guy was not moving around. Look how much it's moving already. And guys, it's instant idle. The idle is so much better already. So I'm gonna guess that was our problem. I mean, look, we had a ton of problems, but that O2 was definitely bad, the way it was responding. So it's gonna take a minute to, you know, get acclimated to the vehicle. I'm gonna go down the road and back, and hopefully this fixes it. Hopefully. I'm hopeful, guys, because I don't really want to throw any more parts at this thing. So guys, we are back from a drive. That was 100% it. You know, a lot of times those oxygen sensors, for the first couple minutes while they heat up, it really doesn't control anything, but it was instantly better. The idle was instantly better, but the car was warm. You know, I like to change those when they're warm because it's easier to take them out. But guys, sorry this was such a long video, but we did at least iron out the drivability issues with this thing, and it is, yeah, it's like night and day difference. It doesn't stutter or smoke or any of those issues that we were having on the initial drive home with it. And like I said, you know, there's no plan on really keeping this, but I do want it to run well, because I think I'll be using it for a daily while I, you know, lower this or do some other stuff to this. But if you guys did enjoy this video, if it was informative, please, like always, go down there and smash that thumbs up button. Guys, if you are not subscribed, go down there, hit that subscribe button. Of course, ring that bell icon that notifies you every single time we drop a new video, and stay tuned to see what we work on next.